The sun glimmered off the turquoise waters as the luxury yacht Celestia cut smoothly through the gentle waves, its ivory hull catching the light like polished pearl. All around, the world seemed suspended in beauty. White sails flapping gently, seagulls gliding over the crest of the ocean, and the scent of salt and citrus lingering in the breeze. It was paradise, at least on the surface. Camilla Devereaux sat alone near the bow, one hand resting on the curve of her swollen belly, the other gripping the handle of her lemonade glass, which was already collecting condensation. She was 8 months pregnant and glowing, at least according to the photos her husband Ricardo had insisted on posting to social media. "My radiant queen," the captions always read. "My heir is on the way," he once posted over a shot of Camilla smiling in a white linen dress, her belly gently cradled in both hands. But Camilla knew that smile. She knew how it had been forced, how behind the flash of the camera, her eyes had already begun to water, not with joy, but with exhaustion. The pregnancy hadn't been easy, but it wasn't the physical toll that wore her down. It was the coldness. The way Ricardo had grown more distracted by business deals and less interested in doctor visits. The way he no longer touched her with affection, only with showmanship. The way her name seemed to exist only in captions, not in conversation. Still, she had come on this trip. He called it a baby moon, their final escape before parenthood. He had spared no expense. A private crew, a renowned chef on board, 2 masseuses, and a personal trainer. But the yacht, for all its luxury, felt to Camilla like a floating illusion. Beauty without substance, calm without warmth. She heard laughter echoing from the upper deck, Ricardo's unmistakable laugh, sharp and performative. She tried not to flinch. It wasn't unusual. He was always entertaining guests, even when it was supposed to be just them. He had invited 2 business partners, a couple influencers, and a fitness model he claimed was there to help you stay limber for the baby. Camilla had smiled tightly and nodded, even as something icy coiled around her heart. Now, the ache in her lower back told her to go rest, but something, instinct maybe, kept her frozen in place. She stood slowly, pressing her hand to the railing to steady herself. Her sandals clicked softly as she stepped across the deck. The breeze tugged gently at her hair. She moved up the stairwell that led to the upper lounge area, where the laughter had grown louder. As she reached the top, she paused. The doorway was open just a crack. She heard Ricardo's voice, low and playful. "God, you make me feel 20 again," he said, followed by the unmistakable sound of a kiss. Camilla's chest tightened. "Don't worry," the woman whispered, laughing. "Your wife's probably napping. She's always tired these days." Another laugh. Something inside her snapped, not with rage, but with a dull, sickening clarity. She stepped forward, pushed the door open. Ricardo and the fitness model, Sabrina, that was her name, froze, still tangled in each other's arms. Ricardo's shirt was unbuttoned, her hands resting on his bare chest. Sabrina blinked, her mouth parted as if caught mid-lie. "Camilla," Ricardo started, his voice falsely calm, "you should be resting." She didn't speak. Her throat burned. Her belly felt heavy with more than life now, heavy with betrayal, humiliation, and something deeper she couldn't yet name. She turned without a word, walked back down the stairs, one hand clutching the railing harder than she meant to. She moved past the crew, past the guests, past the glass doors of the salon, and into the quiet of the lower deck hallway. Her vision blurred. Her feet took her to the far end of the yacht, to the back deck, overlooking the endless sea. The sky was so blue it hurt her eyes. The water sparkled like shattered glass, and for a moment, a horrible moment, Camilla understood the impulse. It would be so easy. One step, just one. The wind blew her hair back as she approached the railing, her fingers brushing the metal. She looked down. The waves curled and churned far below. Her heart thundered. Her breath caught. The weight in her belly shifted. "Please," she whispered, not even knowing who she was speaking to. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Ma'am, you all right?" She turned, startled. A man stood there, simple in appearance, broad-shouldered, sunburned, wearing a workman's polo and a name tag that read Lucas Hartman. He looked out of place, not polished like Ricardo's guests, but grounded, solid. His eyes were kind. "I'm sorry," Camilla said, shaking her head. "I didn't hear you." "You looked?" He paused, choosing his words with care, like someone who needed to hear something real. Camilla stared at him. Something in her cracked. "I thought I had everything," she whispered. I thought this was the dream." Lucas nodded slowly, stepping a little closer, but giving her space. "Dreams can lie," he said quietly. "Sometimes they wear silk and speak with perfect teeth." That startled a bitter laugh from her. She covered her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Do you want to sit?" he asked gently, gesturing to a nearby bench tucked under a shaded overhang. "Or just breathe for a minute?" She hesitated, then nodded. They sat side by side, the ocean before them. For a long time, they said nothing. Lucas pulled a crumpled paper napkin from his pocket and handed it to her. "It's clean, I promise. I saved it from breakfast. My son wiped syrup on his sleeve instead." "Your son?" "Yeah, he's below deck, reading or drawing or plotting the downfall of mankind. He's 10. She smiled through tears. "And you're here on vacation?" Lucas chuckled. "Hardly. I fix things. Wires, engines. Won some employee award. Free ticket to paradise." Camilla looked at him, really looked. His face was weathered, but calm. Not jaded, just real. She felt something loosen in her chest. "I'm Camilla," she said finally, "and I think I'm broken." Lucas didn't flinch. "Nah," he said, watching the waves. "You're just bent. Happens to the best of us." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. Camilla exhaled. Not a cry, not a sob, just air. Steady and long, as if for the first time in weeks, her lungs remembered how to do it on their own. And far behind them, up on the upper deck, Ricardo laughed again. Loud, performative, unaware that for the first time in their marriage, Camilla wasn't listening anymore. The sun dipped lower into the horizon, casting long amber streaks across the ocean as the yacht glided in lazy arcs along the coastline. Camilla remained seated near the rear deck, her body still, but her thoughts restless. The earlier storm within her had not subsided. It had simply shifted. The chaos of betrayal now hummed beneath her ribs like a quiet engine. There had been no confrontation, no shouting, no slaps or threats or confessions, just silence. Her silence. And that, somehow, had spoken loudest. Lucas had left after a while, without ceremony or probing. He had returned to his cabin, to his son, leaving behind no pressure, only the echo of presence. That, more than anything, had startled Camilla. He hadn't asked for her story. He hadn't questioned her choices. He hadn't tried to fix anything. He had simply stayed close until she no longer felt like she might fall apart. That night, Camilla did not return to the shared master suite with Ricardo. Instead, she took her time walking along the dimly lit hallway that connected the guest rooms. She chose one with no view, no luxury furniture, and no memory of him. She lay on the bed, fully clothed, her hand resting protectively over her belly. The baby moved once, gently, as if acknowledging the shift. and for the first time since they boarded the yacht, Camilla fell into sleep without tears on her cheeks. The following morning began with pale blue light spilling across the deck. A breeze moved through the curtains like a sigh. The yacht's engines purred softly, and the sea was calm. Camilla emerged from her cabin wearing a long linen dress, her hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. She looked different, not composed. She wasn't interested in pretending anymore, but grounded, as if her grief had found something to root itself in. She avoided the upper deck where Ricardo often held court with his guests. Instead, she moved toward the cruise section, where Lucas was helping his son unpack a breakfast tray. The boy, Toby, was quiet but focused, arranging butter packets and jam like precious gems. He looked up when Camilla entered, his face neither shy nor bold, simply curious. Lucas acknowledged her with a simple nod. There was no awkwardness, no questions. He merely made space. That was what Camilla noticed most. He always made space. For her to sit, for her to feel, for her to just be. Over the next few days, she found herself gravitating toward Lucas and his son, drawn not by pity or desperation, but by something far older, something ancient and deeply human, the pull toward safety. With them, everything felt unpolished, sincere, uncomplicated. Lucas spoke in calm tones, answered Toby's questions with patience, and moved with the quiet steadiness of someone who had seen too much to be shaken by little things. He did not offer advice. He did not pry. Instead, he peeled fruit carefully, passed her extra water without being asked, and waited when she paused mid-sentence to collect herself. Toby, too, seemed to sense what adults could not. He never asked why Camilla sat with them. He simply shared his crayons, showed her his half-finished drawings, and offered tiny facts about whales and sea turtles. One afternoon, as they sat together watching gulls swoop over the wake of the yacht, he pressed his hand gently to her belly and whispered something to the child growing inside. Camilla didn't hear the words, but she felt the warmth of them. Her throat tightened. She said nothing. Days passed slowly, not with the languor of idleness, but with the care of something healing. Camilla's body softened again, not from surrender, but from exhale. Her shoulders no longer curled inward. Her eyes no longer darted to the upper deck with anxiety. She began sleeping through the night and waking with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. One evening, as the yacht anchored near a quiet bay, she sat with Lucas and Toby by the edge of the deck. The sky was painted with the dying colors of dusk. Lucas handed her a folded piece of paper without comment. It was one of Toby's drawings, a woman standing at the bow of a boat, her hair like wind, her hand resting on her belly, and next to her, a small boy holding a seashell. Camilla stared at it for a long time. It wasn't perfect. The lines were uneven, the proportions strange, but it was the truest thing she had seen in days. She folded it gently and tucked it into her bag. Later that night, Ricardo finally sought her out. He found her alone on the observation deck, her body silhouetted by the moonlit sea. He spoke with practiced remorse, asked why she was avoiding him, tried to cast his betrayal as a misunderstanding. But Camilla did not respond. She did not need to. Her silence was now a fortress. Her absence from his orbit was the loudest condemnation he had ever received. He left in a huff, confused and irritable. The woman he once controlled with compliments and money no longer bowed to him. She no longer needed to explain why she had changed. She simply had. Camilla returned to the cruise deck where Lucas sat, mending a torn deck chair, and Toby played with a flashlight in the corner. She sat down beside them, rested her hands over her stomach, and said nothing. She didn't have to. There was nothing more to perform, no apologies to beg for, no status to maintain. In the quiet presence of a widowed man and his thoughtful child, Camilla found something that had eluded her for months, perhaps years. A place where she could simply exist. A place where she was not someone's wife or trophy or status symbol. A place where she was just Camilla. And in that stillness, she realized she had not fallen apart. She had landed. The waters surrounding the yacht shimmered beneath the midday sun, and the breeze had softened into a warm, steady rhythm that rocked the vessel with the gentlest of sways. But the peacefulness of the sea belied the brewing tension above deck. Camilla felt it long before it erupted, like the first tremor of pressure before a storm. She had known it would come. She had not known when, but she had stopped waiting in fear. The moment now arrived with grim inevitability. Ricardo had grown irritable in recent days. His carefully curated image of control was slipping. The stories of business calls began to vanish, replaced with long stares towards the lower decks. He asked questions under the guise of concern. Where she had been spending her time, whether she was feeling lonely, if she needed company, but Camilla recognized the simmer beneath his smile. What he truly wanted to ask was, who was that man? She had never spoken Lucas's name to Ricardo. She hadn't needed to. Ricardo had seen them. He had noticed the way she laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in months. He had seen her brush a crumb from Toby's cheek and accept a seashell from the boy's hand like it was a diamond. And he had seen Lucas. Calm, unthreatening, but solid. The kind of man who didn't need to declare his strength. It lived in the way he held silence without letting it collapse into discomfort. In the way he made people feel safe just by showing up and staying still. For Ricardo, this was unacceptable. Camilla had stepped outside that morning wearing a soft blue sundress, one that fluttered around her knees and made her belly look like a sacred orb rather than a burden. She walked barefoot towards the shaded lounge near the back of the yacht where Lucas and Toby were finishing breakfast. Lucas handed her a mug of tea without a word, and Toby pulled over a third chair, wordlessly making room. It should have been unremarkable. It should have been ordinary. But Ricardo watched from above, and his pride could not survive it. He descended the stairs like a storm in tailored linen. His eyes narrowed, his shoulders squared, the corners of his mouth tight with practiced outrage. The guests lounging nearby turned subtly to watch. Some held back smiles. Others whispered. The captain looked away. Everyone felt the shift. Everyone sensed the moment had arrived. Ricardo strode across the deck towards the three of them, his voice sharp and clear before he even reached their table. What followed was not a conversation. It was an attack cloaked in accusation, dripping with the smugness of a man who thought money insulated him from consequence. Ricardo hurled cruel insinuations, called Lucas names that no one had used since grade school, accused Camilla of shaming him, embarrassing him, betraying his generosity. Camilla remained seated. Lucas stood only after Ricardo's hand hit the table hard enough to spill the tea. Still, Lucas didn't speak. Ricardo stepped closer. He towered over Lucas, his voice growing louder, his words losing coherence as rage overtook performance. He gestured at Camilla, at the crew, at the yacht that was supposed to symbolize control. But now it was all unraveling, and everyone could see it. And then Ricardo did what Camilla knew he would do the moment his mouth failed him. He reached. It was not a full punch. It was a shove. An entitled, desperate lunge from a man whose ego could not tolerate the quiet dignity in the face before him. But Lucas did not stumble. He did not curse. He did not hesitate. He simply stepped forward, caught Ricardo's wrist mid-swing, and twisted with the practiced strength of someone who had learned long ago how to stop a fight before it became a tragedy. Ricardo cried out, not in pain, but in humiliation, as his knees hit the deck with a dull thud. Lucas released him at once and stepped back, his breathing steady, his posture calm. He didn't smirk, he didn't taunt, he didn't say a word. Ricardo scrambled to his feet, his shirt untucked, his pride shattered. The guests said nothing. The silence was heavier than applause. Camilla stood slowly, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. She did not help Ricardo. She did not speak to him. Instead, she turned toward Lucas and Toby. With a quiet nod, she stepped forward, her body moving with the grace of someone who had already left the past behind. She walked with them, past the shattered remnants of her marriage, past the stairs, past the cracked illusion of luxury and power. The deck creaked gently under their feet. The sea rolled on. Ricardo's voice called after her once, loud, brittle, desperate, but Camilla did not turn around. She had nothing left to say to a man who only learned to shout when others learned to listen. Later that afternoon, she packed her things with surprising ease. There wasn't much, a few clothes, a necklace from her grandmother, the drawing Toby had given her, her passport, a small journal she had begun scribbling in again. The rest, gowns, jewelry, designer luggage, she left behind. They no longer belonged to her. When the yacht docked at the private resort's marina, Camilla disembarked not as a runaway or a wife in hiding. She stepped onto land as a woman beginning again. Lucas and Toby walked beside her. The staff tried to maintain composure as Ricardo descended after them hours later, red-faced and hollow. His guests had already begun to scatter, their conversations low and awkward. The scandal would not make headlines, it would live only in whispers among the elite, but for Ricardo, that was far worse. Silence among the rich was the sharpest kind of judgment. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, Camilla sat beside a quiet fire pit in a small rustic guest house near the far end of the resort, her feet tucked beneath her and a warm blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Lucas sat nearby, his hands gently smoothing out Toby's damp curls after a long bath. No one spoke of the yacht. No one mentioned Ricardo. The only sound was the crackle of firewood and the rhythmic breath of a world that no longer asked Camilla to perform. She wasn't a trophy anymore. She wasn't a possession. She wasn't a woman waiting to be chosen. She had chosen. And as the night deepened and her unborn daughter stirred within her, Camilla knew she had stepped into something real. Not just safety, not just peace, but the kind of love that didn't begin with promises or diamonds. It began with presence, with listening, with hands that caught her not when she fell, but when she began to rise. The morning after they left the yacht behind felt like waking from a long, tangled dream. Camilla sat in the passenger seat of Lucas's truck, her hands folded over her belly, the road winding out before them like a ribbon unfurling towards something she had no name for yet. The sky had shifted from bruised gray to pale blue, the light cautious but promising. In the back seat, Lucas's son, Toby, dozed against the window, his jacket pulled up like a blanket, his face still flushed from the cold night air. They didn't speak much on the drive. It wasn't necessary. After everything, betrayal, confrontation, chaos, the silence between them now felt different. Not strained, not awkward. It was filled with something softer. Trust, maybe, or the beginnings of it. Lucas's home stood at the edge of a small town nestled between pine trees and rolling hills, far from the noise and performance of the world Camilla had just escaped. The house wasn't large or extravagant like the places she'd grown used to, But the moment she stepped inside, she felt something settle inside her, like a knot loosening. The air smelled of cedar and warmth. The walls were lined with books, framed sketches, and the kind of quiet clutter that spoke of a life lived with intention, not for show. Lucas had cleared a room for her, Toby's old nursery. It was still painted soft yellow, with hand-painted clouds on the ceiling and a faded rocking horse in the corner. Camilla ran her fingers over the wooden rail of the crib, then sat slowly on the edge of the bed. No one had ever made space for her without expecting something in return. Until now. The first days blurred into a rhythm, not fast, not loud, just steady. Lucas went to work during the day. He ran a local contracting business and had more than enough repair jobs around town. Toby went to school, returning each afternoon with stories about classmates, playground mischief, and the occasional scraped knee. Camilla stayed home. She rested, she read. She took walks around the property, learning the feel of the place beneath her feet. At first, she was unsure what to do with her hands, her time, her breath. But gradually, the tension she carried like armor began to fall away. She baked bread. She mended an old quilt she found in the closet. She stood by the window and watched Toby and Lucas build a birdhouse together in the backyard. Toby asking endless questions and Lucas answering them with patience she'd never seen in the man she used to call husband. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Toby warmed to her with an ease that surprised her. He didn't call her anything, didn't ask anything heavy, but each day he seemed to sit a little closer, speak a little more freely. One evening, he placed a smooth stone in her hand with a smile and said, "For the baby," before running off to do his homework. It was the first time in months that Camilla cried, not out of pain, but because something inside her had been touched gently, and it didn't know how else to respond. Lucas didn't hover. He didn't press her with questions or fill the silence with advice. He simply offered space. And in that space, she grew. The distance from her former life, its glittering cages, its cold marble floors, felt wider by the day. Her body felt heavier, yes, as her pregnancy progressed, but her soul felt lighter. At night, she would sit on the porch in the old rocking chair and watch the stars come out, a blanket over her legs and her hands cradling her belly. Sometimes Lucas would join her, handing her a mug of tea without saying a word. Sometimes he'd bring his guitar, strumming a few soft chords as the crickets joined in. They didn't speak of what had happened, not directly. But every now and then their eyes would meet, and that was enough. One evening, during a quiet supper, Lucas set down his fork and looked at her. Not past her, not around her, but directly at her. "You're not just surviving anymore," he said gently. "You're starting to live." She didn't respond with words. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand, lacing her fingers with his. The next morning, Lucas found her organizing the nursery. She had washed the old baby clothes, arranged them by size, and set up a small mobile over the crib. When he stepped into the room, she turned with a smile that didn't ask for permission or apology. "I want her to be born into love," she said. "Not chaos, not fear, just love." And so the days moved forward. Lucas built a cradle from reclaimed oak, carving soft waves into the headboard. Toby painted a sign for the door that read, "Baby's Room," in crooked letters. Camilla began journaling again, pages filled with hopes and small victories and things she never wanted to forget. She wrote letters to her unborn daughter, about the ocean, about silence, about the first time she laughed in this house and didn't feel guilty. She wrote about her mother's perfume and the first time Lucas made her tea, about how healing didn't come in a flash of lightning, but in the way Toby always left a light on in the hallway at night, just in case. As her due date drew closer, Camilla found herself dreaming often. Not of nightmares as before, but of soft places, of kitchens filled with laughter, of tiny footsteps echoing down the hallway, of family, real and fragile and true. One night, she woke from one of those dreams to find Lucas sitting on the edge of her bed, a cup of water in his hand. Her back had been aching. He knew without asking. "Tell me something you've never said out loud," he murmured, more invitation than question. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "I never thought I'd survive." He didn't flinch. He just nodded. "You did. And more than that, you've built something better." In the final weeks, as the air grew colder and the leaves began to fall, the house seemed to draw inward, wrapping around them like a cocoon. Camilla took slower walks. Toby made her laugh with stories. Lucas brought home extra blankets and stocked the pantry. They moved like a unit, unspoken and natural. The night before her due date, they all sat on the couch, watching a storm roll in. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Toby curled beside her, his hand resting gently on her belly. Lucas watched them, his eyes quiet but alive. She looked at them both and felt, for the first time in her life, completely safe. Not because the world couldn't touch her, but because if it did, she wouldn't face it alone. The family wasn't traditional. It wasn't expected, but it was whole. And in that wholeness, Camilla finally saw herself not as someone broken or lost, but as someone found, someone beginning again, someone loved. As the wind howled outside and rain tapped gently on the roof, she whispered a single word into the silence. "Home," and it answered back. The rain had settled into a soft, steady rhythm that pattered against the roof like a lullaby. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the coastal breeze, their branches dripping with silver droplets. The sea beyond the cove moved in slow pulses, its wildness subdued by the calm that had crept over the small home. Inside, the light was low and golden, filtered through linen curtains that danced slightly with each breeze. The scent of baked apples lingered in the air, mingling with the subtle floral traces of chamomile and warm wool. The guest house had changed over the weeks, not in structure, but in spirit. It no longer felt like a place borrowed or temporarily occupied. It felt lived in, filled with the breath and memory of its new inhabitants. And now it would become the place where everything changed again. Camilla's labor began in the stillness of the early morning. She didn't cry out. She didn't panic. She simply exhaled, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself that she was ready. The weight in her body shifted, and with it came the realization that this time, unlike so many other moments in her life, she would not have to face the pain alone. Lucas had risen first, as he often did, to make tea and check the weather. He found her standing in the hallway, her hands braced against the wall, her forehead glistening. One look exchanged between them said everything. He didn't ask questions. He didn't speak empty comforts. He simply nodded and began moving. Quiet, capable, certain. Toby was woken gently and taken to the neighbor's cottage. Two retired sisters who adored him and always had a jar of homemade jam waiting. Camilla kissed his forehead and whispered that everything would be fine. He believed her. She believed it too. The hours that followed were slow and measured, unfolding like the tide itself. The contractions grew stronger, closer. Lucas stayed beside her the entire time, guiding, supporting, never once leaving the room. The pain crested in waves, but never once did she feel unanchored. He was there, and that was enough. When the moment came, it was raw and holy. The rain stopped just before the final push, and in the hush that followed, a new sound rose to fill the room. A cry, sharp and certain, the voice of a life announcing itself. Lucas caught the child with trembling hands, eyes damp not with fear, but reverence. He placed the tiny girl on Camilla's chest, and time seemed to halt. Camilla wept, not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from the overwhelming truth that she had made it, that they had made it, that her daughter, soft and strong and alive, had arrived not into chaos, but into love. They named her Alina. It was a name Camilla had once scribbled into the margins of a notebook during a childhood summer, forgotten until Lucas found the page and read it aloud one evening under the porch light. It meant light, in a language neither of them spoke, but both understood. In the days that followed, the house shifted once more. It quieted, deepened. The rhythms changed to match Alina's needs. Feedings, diaper changes, soft songs hummed in the dark. Camilla moved through it all with the slow grace of someone reborn. She no longer flinched when holding her daughter, no longer questioned her worth. The betrayal that had almost drowned her no longer echoed in every mirror or shadow. That life, the yacht, the wealth, the golden cage, was behind her now like a story she no longer had to carry. Lucas was different too. Gentler, lighter. He walked with a new stillness, no longer haunted. He fixed things that didn't need fixin' just to stay in the same room. He cooked more. He laughed more. At night, when Alina slept between them in the crib Lucas had built by hand, he'd sometimes reach for Camilla's hand in the dark and simply hold it. Toby returned after 2 days and ran straight to the crib. He peered over the edge in complete silence, then looked up at Camilla and said, "She's loud." Camilla laughed harder than she had in weeks. "That's good," she replied. "She'll need her voice." Weeks turned to months, and the home grew fuller, warmer. They didn't mark time with calendars or milestones. They marked it with Alina's first coup, with Toby teaching her to blow bubbles, with the way Camilla smiled more and cried less, and the way Lucas began humming old songs while working outside. One day, while folding laundry, Camilla found something tucked into the back pocket of a pair of jeans, Ricardo's old business card. Her fingers curled around it, then released. She dropped it into the trash without a second thought. It was no longer her story. Spring arrived slowly on the coast. The flowers in the garden, Toby's doing, began to bloom. Lavender, daisies, small wild poppies. Alina watched from her blanket, her tiny hands reaching toward the sky. Camilla sat beside her, barefoot in the grass, eyes closed, listening to the sea and the giggle of a boy who once needed saving, but had become a savior in his own quiet way. Lucas came out with lemonade and stood watching the scene before him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand, but it was his. Their story had not begun with fireworks. It had begun in the wreckage of another life. But what they built from it, this home, this family, this garden of soft days and strong roots, was something neither of them could have imagined. They were not perfect. They still had sleepless nights and unpaid bills, but they were whole. And in the stillness of their new life, they had found something deeper than happiness. They had found peace. And that peace, in all its quiet, enduring glory, was the loudest love of all. If this story moved you even a little, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if stories about love, healing, and quiet strength speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe. We've got more beautiful stories waiting, right here, just for you. Thank you for being with us today.